Imagine you are sitting in a glass-walled conference room. The air is, just so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
Right. Two senior executives across from you are minutes away from completely tearing each other apart over a product launch, and you have been brought in to mediate the situation.
Which is a pretty terrifying position to be in.
It really is. And you don't have a magical wand to fix their workflow. You don't have the authority to just fire one of them. You essentially have one tool at your disposal, and that's your ears.
Right, which sounds incredibly simple, almost insulting, until you realize how few people actually know how to use that tool under pressure. I mean, we assume that because we can hear, we are automatically listening.
And that is the trap, isn't it? Because hearing is just a biological passive perception. Your eardrums are processing sound waves whether you want them to or not, just like your lungs process oxygen.
Yeah, absolutely.
But listening is a highly active, incredibly demanding cognitive engine. And here is where it gets really interesting. The way you tune that engine has to completely change based on the environment you're walking into.
It dictates entirely whether you succeed or fail in a conversation. You cannot use the same listening methodology to mediate a corporate dispute that you would use to, say, survive a dense university biology lecture.
But people try to apply a one-size-fits-all approach every single day.
They do, and it leads to massive breakdowns in communication.
So that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are stacking up two entirely different methodologies, pulled from a really fascinating array of sources we've gathered.
We've got some great material today.
We do. We have a corporate conflict mediation guide from Asana, high-stakes language proficiency prep materials for exams like the TOEFL and IELTS, and transcripts from academic lectures.
It's a really diverse stack.
Yeah, and by synthesizing these, we are going to pit interpersonal active listening against academic analytical listening. The goal is to give you a masterclass in knowing exactly which toolkit to deploy and when, so you don't just zone out at the worst possible time.
Quick definition for the listener: to zone out means to lose focus or let your attention wander away from what's happening. Okay, jumping back in.
Thanks for that. So let's get some definitions right out of the gate.
Sure. To set the baseline, interpersonal active listening is the technique of taking in what is said, processing the emotional weight of it, and replying with an accurate summary.
So the primary goal there is building empathy and resolving conflict, right?
Exactly. It's about psychological safety.
Okay, and on the other side of the ring, we have academic analytical listening. This methodology, it basically strips out the emotion entirely.
Completely removes it.
It is the strategic, ruthless extraction of factual information, main ideas, and structural transitions from dense audio.
It really is a stark contrast. One is about generating human connection, and the other is basically treating your brain like a data extraction algorithm.
I look at it like the difference between being a soundboard engineer and being a web scraper.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, with interpersonal active listening, you are at the mixing desk. You're constantly adjusting the dials for tone, pitch, emotional resonance, to make sure the final track sounds harmonious.
Right.
But with academic analytical listening, you are just a piece of code scraping a website.
Yeah.
You do not care about the beautiful colors or the emotional impact. You are just looking for the structural metadata and the raw text.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. The tools required for a soundboard engineer are completely useless to a data scraper.
Totally useless.
If you sit in a high-level corporate briefing and try to emotionally validate the presenter's feelings about quarterly revenue drops, you are going to miss the actual physical data you need.
And if your partner comes home venting about a terrible, emotionally draining day and you sit there silently taking bullet point notes on their timeline of events,
you are going to find yourself sleeping on the couch.
Exactly. So let's start with that soundboard engineer approach, the interpersonal active listening methodology. The big picture why here is all about relationship building.
Yes. The core mechanism revolves around bypassing the speaker's defensive instincts. When people are in conflict, their amygdala, the fear and threat center of the brain, is highly active.
They're just waiting to be attacked or misunderstood.
Right. So your job as the listener is to soothe that neurological response.
And the sources detail very specific practical ways to do that, starting with paraphrasing and summarizing, using phrases like, if I'm understanding you correctly, or it sounds like what you were saying is.
The underlying psychology there is profound, actually. It forces you, as the listener, to stop formulating your own counter-argument. You literally cannot effectively summarize someone else's point if you are just waiting for your turn to speak.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, though.
Go for it.
If I come to you incredibly stressed out, and I say, my boss is micromanaging me and I'm losing my mind, and you immediately reply with, so what you are saying is your boss micromanages you and you are stressed.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Right. I'm going to find that incredibly robotic and honestly a bit patronizing. Doesn't this constantly interrupt the natural flow of human conversation?
If you do it poorly, absolutely, that is the quickest way to alienate someone. The key distinction the sources make is that you have to synthesize the meaning, not just parrot the exact words back to them.
Ah, okay. Synthesize the meaning.
Right, so if you tell me about your micromanaging boss, effective paraphrasing sounds like you're feeling a complete lack of autonomy right now, and that's exhausting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that hits completely differently.
Because you are identifying the core emotion lack of autonomy that they didn't explicitly name. You're showing them, you see the blueprint of their frustration.
That makes a lot more sense. It's about translating their frustration into validation. And the sources pair that verbal synthesis with physical mirroring.
Right, emotional and physical mirroring. That's where you reflect their tone and body language. If they're speaking softly, leaning forward, looking down, you lower your volume, lean in, and match their energy.
That taps into those mirror neurons in the brain, right?
Exactly. It automatically signals to the speaker on a primal subconscious level that they belong to the same tribe as you. It signals safety.
And you combine that safety with open-ended questions. The rule of thumb here is never asking a question that can be answered with a simple yes or no.
Yeah, those are conversation killers.
Right. If a colleague says a project failed, asking, were you angry about the deadline, is a dead end. They say yes, and the conversation stalls. Instead, you ask, how did the shifting deadline impact your workflow?
You are inviting them to explore their own cognitive space. Which brings us to what might be the single hardest directive in the Asana Mediation Guide.
Oh, the my own statements rule.
Yes. You must actively suppress the urge to give advice or center your own experience.
I struggle with this one immensely. When someone tells me a problem, my immediate instinct is to fix it. I want to say, oh, you should have emailed HR, or, well, if it were me, I would have set a hard boundary.
It's human nature to want to fix things.
But why is our instinct to help actually so damaging in this context?
Because giving advice, especially unsolicited advice, inherently centers the listener's ego. It subtly implies, I am smarter than you, and I can solve this puzzle you're struggling with.
Wow, okay. I never thought about it like that.
In interpersonal active listening, the goal isn't to solve the puzzle for them, it's to hold the pieces so they can put it together themselves.
Let's ground this in a real-world example from our stack, that Asana corporate mediation scenario.
Perfect example.
So we have colleague one, who strongly prioritizes product design. They argue that an aesthetically beautiful, highly polished product sets the foundation for market success.
And then we have colleague 2, who is entirely focused on core functionality. They argue that if the software has bugs, all the beautiful design in the world won't save them.
And they are completely deadlocked.
A very common, very messy workplace clash. Now, if the mediator jumps in and says, look, let's just do 50% design and 50% functionality, both parties feel slighted.
They feel managed, not heard.
Exactly. Instead, the mediator deploys interpersonal listening. They use the synthesis technique.
So the mediator turns to colleague one and says, so you feel that investing heavily in the initial design architecture will ultimately lead to a more viable product in the long run.
And then they turn to colleague 2 and say, and you feel that ensuring flawless functionality must be the absolute priority before any cosmetic work begins.
Notice what happened there. The mediator didn't agree with either of them. They didn't offer a single solution.
But by reflecting the core arguments back without judgment, the amygdala hijack in both colleagues starts to subside. The fundamental human need to have your perspective validated has been met. Only then can actual problem solving begin.
But the cognitive demand to pull that off is staggering. And that is the massive pitfall or the con of this methodology.
It's exhausting.
You're tracking verbal arguments, emotional undertones, body language, and tone of voice, all while actively suppressing your own ego and opinions.
And it requires you to be entirely visually and physically present. You cannot multitask.
Not at all.
The source material highlights a fascinating psychological activity to prove this. Participants are instructed to tell a deeply personal story to a listener. But the listener is secretly instructed to exhibit bad listener habits halfway through.
Like what kind of habits?
Just tiny everyday distractions. They start looking at their watch, scratching their arm, coughing, or just letting their gaze drift to the window.
Just minor things we all do.
Exactly. And the results are instantaneous. The moment the visual and physical attention breaks, the speaker's flow is completely destroyed.
Wow.
They start stumbling over their words, their emotional safety evaporates, and they usually just stop talking altogether. The technique collapses the second you lose that intense, multi-layered visual focus.
But that emotionally intense, hyper-focused state is exactly why interpersonal active listening completely falls apart if you step into a university lecture hall or a corporate data briefing.
It's the wrong tool for the job.
Right. You literally do not have the cognitive bandwidth to emotionally mirror a professor talking at 150 words a minute about cellular biology. The environment dictates the tool, and the environment just changed.
Which means we put away the mixing board and pull out the data scraper. We are moving into topic B, academic analytical listening.
The entire objective flips here. In academic or high-stakes professional settings, the speaker is not looking for your emotional validation.
Not even a little bit.
The keynote speaker at a tech conference does not care if you understand their core emotional truth. Your goal is information extraction, tracking complex structural arguments, passing rigorous exams like the TOEFL, or pulling actionable metrics out of a briefing.
Because the goal is data retention, the mechanics are radically different. For one, taking notes during an interpersonal conflict is rude and weird.
Very weird.
But in academic analytical listening, taking notes is mandatory. It is the only way to succeed. But the sources are incredibly strict about how you do this. You absolutely cannot write in full sentences.
Well, the bottleneck is physical, right?
Mm.
The average person speaks at around 130 to 150 words per minute, but you can only write at about 30 or 40 words per minute.
Right. The math just doesn't work.
If you are trying to write a full sentence with proper grammar, you have already missed the next 3 sentences the speaker delivered.
That is the cognitive bottleneck perfectly described. To survive this, you have to develop a strict, ruthless abbreviation system.
So you're filtering out all the filler words.
Exactly. You use arrows to denote cause and effect. You use a W with, a slash for the word with. You use BC for because, and a mathematical not equal sign for differences and contrasts.
So you are bypassing the physical limitation of your hand by creating a personalized shorthand code. But you aren't just writing down random facts. The sources emphasize that a master analytical listener is actually tracking the architecture of the audio.
They are listening specifically for transition words. Transition words are the absolute lifeblood of academic listening. It's a total game changer.
Hey, listener, just defining this quickly. A game changer is a newly introduced element or factor that significantly changes an existing situation or way of doing things.
Sweet.
Back to the deep dive.
Thanks. Yet when a professor says, furthermore, conversely, this leads to, or on the other hand, they aren't just taking a breath. They are handing you the structural blueprint of their entire lecture.
It's like they are flashing a neon sign that says, hey, a brand new category of information starting right now. Create a new bullet point. If we look at the specific biology lecture from the source materials, the one about the cheetah's sprint mechanism, this methodology becomes crystal clear.
Right. Imagine the professor starts detailing the elasticity of the cheetah's tendons and how the massive flexion of its spine allows for unparalleled acceleration, but limits its ability to turn quickly.
If you were using interpersonal listening, you were sitting there nodding sympathetically, imagining how hard it must be for the cheetah to catch its prey.
Which is completely unhelpful for the test.
Exactly. But because you are using analytical listening, you don't care about the cheetah's feelings. You are immediately mapping out an outline. Roman numeral 1. Speed mechanism. Subpoint A, tendon elasticity. Subpoint B, spine flexion.
And then Roman numeral 2, the trade-off. Subpoint A, poor stability.
You capture the topic, the mechanism, and the underlying purpose in a matter of seconds.
And you are doing this while actively predicting the questions you are going to be asked. In high-stakes testing, you use this structural tracking to anticipate main idea questions, detail questions, and function questions.
Okay, here is where my detective analogy hits a wall, and I want your perspective on this.
Sure.
As a data scraper looking for hard facts and transition words, how do we capture implied meaning? Because so much of high-stakes listening involves inference.
It does.
But if we've stripped out all the emotional tracking and tone analysis to save cognitive load, how do we catch inferences without accidentally projecting our own biases into our notes?
That is the most difficult hurdle in analytical listening, and it is where test takers often fail. You have to realize that inference in an academic context relies on very specific verbal cues, not the speaker's emotional resonance.
So I'm not listening for their tone of voice.
No, you are not looking for a sigh or a sad look. You are listening for structural flags like, this suggests it is highly likely that, or one might conclude. You are looking for the logical shadow cast by the data, not a hidden emotion.
The mental stamina required for this is just brutal.
It is a marathon for your brain. You have to identify the topic and the seeker's purpose almost instantaneously. You don't have the luxury of a two-way interaction.
Right. If you missed a phrase in the Asana mediation, you could just say, could you clarify that?
But in a university lecture or standardized audio test, you get exactly one shot to hear it, process the logic, map the structure, and record the data.
Which is exactly why the cons of this method are so severe. It requires intense, unrelenting focus. There is absolutely no interpersonal connection, meaning it can feel incredibly dry.
Very dry.
And your success is completely tied to how fast and accurate your personal shorthand system is. If your code breaks down, your comprehension breaks down.
But once you automate that abbreviation system and train your brain to hunt for structural transitions, your retention skyrockets. You stop drowning in a sea of words and start seeing the matrix of the argument.
We've covered an immense amount of psychological and practical ground here. To make sure you have all of this clearly mapped out, we've actually synthesized these two methodologies into a cheat sheet. We put a clear summary table right in the show notes for you to reference later.
It breaks down the primary goals, the pros, and the cons we just discussed side by side.
Let's give a high-level view of that table. For topic A, interpersonal active listening, the primary goal is empathy, connection, and conflict resolution.
The pros are that it builds massive trust, diffuses tension, and encourages vulnerability.
But the cons are the heavy emotional demand and the need to track complex nonverbal cues without the safety net of taking physical notes.
And for topic B, academic analytical listening, the primary goal is pure information extraction, retention, and structural analysis.
The pros. It is highly efficient for dense material, filters out the useless filler, and primes you for high-stakes environments.
And the cons. It requires intense, sustained focus, totally lacks human connection, and relies heavily on a rapid note-taking shorthand.
For those of you who want the exact breakdown, here's the markdown format of that comparison you'll find in the show notes. Metric topic A, interpersonal active listening topic B, academic analytical listening.
Primary goal, empathy, emotional connection, and conflict resolution. Information extraction, retention, and structural analysis. Pros. Builds strong relationships, diffuses workplace personal tension, encourages deeper sharing. Highly efficient for dense material, filters out filler, prepares you for high-stakes exams meetings. Cons. Emotionally demanding, requires tracking complex nonverbal cues without taking physical notes. Requires intense, sustained focus. Lacks interpersonal connection, highly dependent on rapid note-taking systems.
So stepping back for the details, what does this all mean for the person listening to us right now? What is the ultimate practical takeaway?
The definitive conclusion is that communication mastery is not about being naturally good at just one type of listening. True mastery is the ability to seamlessly code switch between these two frameworks based on the specific demands of your environment.
You have to be able to read the room.
Exactly. Select the right tool before the conversation even begins.
Actionable if-then scenarios are perfect for this. If you find yourself in a team meeting trying to mediate a workflow disagreement between two incredibly frustrated colleagues,
then you must put the pen down.
yes, deploy interpersonal active listening. Mirror their energy, ask open-ended questions, and paraphrase their core frustrations so they feel psychologically safe. Do not try to fix it until they feel heard.
Conversely, if you are sitting in a complex TED Talk, attending a rapid-fire corporate data briefing, or sitting for a language proficiency test,
then you must deploy academic analytical listening. Pick the pen up. Use your shorthand abbreviation system, map out the transition words, and treat the audio like a structural blueprint. Ignore the emotion and capture the architecture.
that way everyone is on the same page.
A quick note for you listening. Being on the same page means having a shared understanding of a situation. All right, wrapping up. Hearing is always a passive biological given, but listening is an active strategic choice.
It really is.
We have spent this time talking about how disastrous it is to take clinical bullet point notes when a friend or colleague is in emotional distress. It fractures the relationship. But I want to leave you with a completely different angle to think about.
I love where this is going.
We are currently living through an explosion of artificial intelligence. Tools that can accurately transcribe a 1-hour lecture, extract the core arguments, and map out the structural transitions in 3 seconds are becoming the norm.
AI is rapidly mastering academic analytical listening. It is becoming a flawless data scraper.
And it can do the shorthand infinitely faster than we ever could.
Exactly.
So the provocative question is this. If AI renders the pure extraction of data an obsolete human skill, what happens to interpersonal active listening?
That's a great question.
As our machines become the ultimate analytical listeners, the messy, emotionally demanding, deeply human art of interpersonal active listening might become the single most valuable, irreplaceable skill you can possess in the modern workforce.
I couldn't agree more.
The next time you sit across from someone speaking, or put your headphones in, ask yourself, which listener are you choosing to be right now, and which one will matter most tomorrow?